Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. In this conversation, I speak with Rory McKeand, who is the Chief Executive of TSG, one of the UK's leading IT companies. This is a really interesting conversation. Rory moved from Chief Operating Officer, already managing 80% of the business and 80% of the people, to Chief Executive. So he felt it was going to be a relatively small change in scope. In fact, he found it surprisingly big, and he's got some great lessons for anybody who's making that kind of jump. We also find out about how Rory would shift his focus. He's very honest about this if he was to redo that first year as chief executive. And then we get into some really fascinating territory. Rory is on a mission to change his industry and his company around the whole area of customer success. He's decided to focus less on sales, become less of a sales-centric company in order to focus on customer success, referrals, and word of mouth. It's really interesting, right? Few chief executives would say, you know what, I need to focus less on sales. But it's what Rory has done, and actually performance has gone up. It's the kind of thing that you couldn't do if you build a spreadsheet. But there was a sense of vision here that's really paid off. So this is a great conversation. It's hopefully going to change your way of thinking around some of these areas as you listen to Rory McKeand of TSG. Hi, Rory, and welcome to the show.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to this. I think you've been in the chief executive role at TSG now for about a year.
That's right.
And so I'm looking forward to diving into what that first year's been like. I think just before we started recording, you were saying it was a bigger leap perhaps than you first imagined when you made that transition from chief operating officer. So before we go into that, do you want to just introduce yourself? What's TSG? And very simply, what was your path to coming into that business?
Thanks, Richard. My name's Rory McKeand. I'm a chief executive at TSG. We're a tech company that takes customer success very seriously. We're a customer success driven company. We're a UK Microsoft and managed services partner. We're about sort of 300 people in the UK. My journey to being chief exec was one of joining the business to help with internal projects, and then a transformation program, looking at some of the basic processes, tooling, and culture, and that really evolved on quite a natural gradient to becoming chief operating officer several years ago. And the way that I led the team was some great mentoring from the chief exec at the time, and I was very fortunate in terms of their timing and what they wanted, for them to sort of step back and to allow me to become chief exec just at the beginning of this year.
So let me just drill into that, because you kind of went over it. Oh yeah, I was chief operating officer and all the stars aligned and I moved on. What did you do? Because it's not every chief operating officer that gets to then step up in a relatively short time frame to CEO. And I know obviously there was perhaps a succession going on and so forth. But what do you think? What was it that helped you perhaps secure that role, where perhaps they could have looked for other candidates? What did they see in you?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I think initially I thought it was about the delivery of quite challenging projects and turning around some of our service areas. So we went from, we're now Times Top 100 employer. We've got a world-class net promoter score and these sorts of things. And though they are important, and yes, some systems and processes and so on had really improved, I think it was really my maturing in that role and taking on other people's ideas and sort of, you know, being seen as a sort of a visible leader in the business. And I think really we're very big on, I said, customer success, but also part of that is about the values and behaviors piece. I know lots of people say it doesn't just live on the wall, but I think there's a lot you get through role modeling. And I think, you know, we went through, you know, a number of challenging periods with those transformation projects. And I think it was just the maturity that I showed, and I had some good guidance, but it was the, you know, the maturity and the pace at which they were driven that made the difference.
Yeah, it's making me think about, you know, I always like to say, you know, we don't get what we want, we get who we are. And
Yeah.
there's this part about, you know, you can kind of get all the tips and try to kind of manipulate the situation, but, you know, fundamentally it's about what we model in the day-to-day, you know, the day-to-day, I don't know, maturity or leadership or whatever it is that's going on that probably comes through. I mean, sometimes you can kind of perhaps, you know, fool some of the people some of the time or whatever and find that shortcut. But I think it's really interesting that you just talked about, yeah, just perhaps seeing you in action and doing things.
Yeah, I mean, I think role modeling has been one of the biggest takeaways for me. Actually, just in general, I think we, you know, I'm you know, avid reader, you know, 4 or 5 management books a month and these sorts of things. And there's so much you go into when you think about, you know, written communication or perhaps an all team update. But for me, it's the little things, you know, it's the role modeling behavior. It's the small things of, you know, if something on the floor, are you going to pick it up when you're walking past, or is it you know, if you see someone that needs some support, are you going to reach out? Or just the simple things of, you know, just challenging someone in a supportive but you know, firm way. If you see, you know, you know, it's something that isn't quite right, or do you leave that to someone else? And I think it's that kind of role modeling bit, which I used to think was not as impactful. Really, that's when I talk to people and say, well, you know, why do you behave in a certain way, or what are some of the cues that you get? Most people can't tell me what I said in the last quarterly update, but they can tell me a particular behavioral thing that I did, or something where I maybe nudged them, you know, a couple of years ago, which is, it's interesting.
That's really interesting. I think it's why I believe so much in role modeling. I mean, I was talking to you earlier about my CEO community, and that's kind of part of it, because again, most CEOs, they don't have many peers closely around them to role model and get to the next level themselves, right? Because often there's only one CEO, right, by definition, almost. Occasionally you find co-CEOs, but it's rare. And so I think you're right, it's kind of caught rather than taught, as you said. So okay. So you got into the role about a year ago. So what was the surprise? What did you discover? You'd already been in the business. You knew the business. I think you ran quite a large part of the business already as COO.
Yeah.
So what changed when you became CEO?
Yeah. So I think if you were to kind of draw it out and say, well, look, here's how much of the org chart that I had before in terms of the majority of it, or, you know, here are the number of suppliers or customers that I was accountable for. You know, in real terms, it was, you know, I was doing 80% of that role. I probably felt like something of a deputy anyway. So that step really, for me beforehand, I felt very well prepared, and I had good guidance and, you know, coaching and so on. But I think it was the responsibility of that leap. In terms of how then people treated me afterwards, or would look at me, and I think something around just the expectation of that role, in that, you know, chief operating officer, you've got a lot of, you know, a breadth and complexity in that role, but ultimately you still have a clarity of what your contribution is, and when you think about the 360 degrees of your business, being accountable for all of it, is, you know, there's a pressure that comes with that, and it's not that expectation. You know, it's not there wasn't pressure in prior roles. You know, I think being a chief operating officer during the pandemic was pretty challenging. It was like a cup final for, you know, in terms of a business. But I think what was interesting was that sort of imposter syndrome, to go, well, hang on, you know, am I the right guy? I mean, it felt like I was the right guy in terms of transformation and bits that we did, but then, you know, you can't help but be your own internal critic, as you said, and a real confidence piece around, you know, what should I focus on? And what's interesting about some of the chief operating officer piece is that you can put some of that on rails. So, you know, continuous service improvement is fine, but when the balance moves from mainly customers to a byproduct of giving shareholders what they want, to then those shareholders being your you know, one of your main one of the main people. It's a different view. So, you know, it's some of those pressures and keeping it alive. So for me, there's a really big alignment thing of, if I can get, you know, people, customer and stakeholders in a line, that really sort of helps in terms of clarity. Whereas I felt that perhaps where I needed to focus weren't necessarily in the right places. So I think I think as a year, if I could have a do-over, I think I'd be much closer on particular key metrics and worry more about role modeling than perhaps around giving that kind of forward view and where we're going. So I think some of it's just around clarity of what the expectation in the role is and where to spend your time, which sounds like a really simple thing, but it's something about you really are you have a lot of freedom within the chief exec role, so you can choose where to spend your time, but also with that it's then around there's a real piece around, well, am I spending that time effectively in a different way than perhaps is I think it's more obvious in prior roles. Yeah.
Did I catch you right? Did you say that you'd spend more time on role modeling, and you said about being closer on key metrics? Did you mean focus in more on those key metrics?
Yeah, so effectively, I did very well at the chief operation officer role by being really key on only 2 or 3 metrics really around customers, some of the KPI elements, but even ones that were rolled up into having real clarity of I could see where I needed to do dip checks in the organization to say, look, do I think this particular project's going as well as I'd expect, or is this service area, this new manager, do I think they're panning out as I expected them to? And I could almost sort of forecast where I'd expect the business to be in a quarter's time. And I think what was interesting is that I should have just taken that same learning and applied it across the rest of the business, whereas I think I didn't do that. I think I got into a position of, well, actually I'm in a more of a visionary role rather than an integrator role, if that makes sense. And so I think if I was to play my time again, and where I've now gotten to at the back end of this year is just being closer on a few of those key metrics and doing more of that dip checking, just to make sure that I'm closer to the business. But equally not wanting to be a micromanager as well, which is quite hard. The way I heard it expressed actually the other day was, fingers out, nose in, which I always thought was a nice way of putting it.
Fingers out, nose in. Okay.
Sort of, not kind of, not kind of interfering, but at the same time making sure you've got enough of a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I call it the transparency bargain, which is eyes on, hands off. In other words, you ask your team, I need to be able to feel confident that I understand what's going on, because I have people I'm accountable to, and I need to be able to give a reason update. But I promise not to then intervene in the individual operational decisions that are properly your responsibility. And the danger, is that when we have visibility, we suddenly feel that we can now make all the decisions. But in reality, we don't have all the data. But I think it's the difference between the Navy and the Army. Historically, read it in a book somewhere. The admirals had a lot more autonomy to make decisions in the name of the king or the emperor, because they were around the world on a boat, right? You couldn't get in touch with them. Whereas the military generals had to send a horse back every night to report on the day's battle, and then get a horse back the following morning with their instructions. And so they were getting kind of micromanaged because it was easier to create this visibility chain.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy, because I often think about that when you're writing, strategy for over the next few years, or when you're talking about a new department or new service. It is almost like writing that charter for them to say, look, if you're halfway around the world and we can't communicate effectively, you need to be able to make decisions. You've got to have the right context to be able to do that, rather than, as you say, keep getting incremental commands. That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we talked about this kind of being focus on the key metrics so that you can get the pulse of the business, done the role modeling. I mean, you talked a bit about the stakeholders. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's one of the big differences. CEO, there's all these extra stakeholders perhaps you didn't realize, and they're not always in alignment, and they can almost never be in alignment. Sometimes you have to manage the tensions, perhaps.
And I think, talking to a few other peers who've gone through something similar, actually, there's a real motivational slump, I think, which is odd, because you almost feel that, because for me, it was apparent to the business that for at least 6 months this was going to happen. Probably I knew it was going to happen slightly earlier than that, but ultimately, it should have been a point of real elation to say, wow, fantastic, brilliant, it's a great achievement, a real pride in terms of leading a business. But sometimes it's much easier to be motivated when you're aligned to customers or people than it is to be aligned to to shareholders, which shareholders are really important. They're fuel for the business. But it's easier to get out of bed to go support your people, or to go and support a customer, than perhaps, and it's having that alignment, really. And I think that sort of motivational piece is an interesting one, where I've heard from a few people where they've, whether it's imposter syndrome, or whether it's just adjusting to the new role, where what should be a real point of elation is actually one of still finding your feet and uncertainty, and actually can be a real slump, and it's something you've got to find your way through. Yeah.
That reminds me of Jeff Bezos, who said, when I think long term the interests of customers and shareholders align. This is a great thing. It's like, if I'm managing for the long term, there is no conflict.
No.
Right? No, because happy customers make happy shareholders.
No, definitely. I think, and that's definitely where I think I've now gotten to, which is, because we're a tech business, sometimes it can feel there's a real complexity, and in things like the pandemic, as an example, we had to react very quickly with customers, and that led to, I think everybody went from having long-term focuses to being very short-term for a period. But actually now, coming out from that and planning over the next few years has really helped create that alignment. And as I sort of mentioned, we're really passionate about customer success, and so that has really helped create that alignment between, the metrics that creates is great for shareholders. It creates people who want to be part of the business from an employee perspective, and it's really hanging on to customers as well. So that actually customer success is really that linchpin for us, as you say, over the medium to long term.
It's Richard here with a quick interlude. As part of my coaching and advisory work, I often work with leaders who have recently taken on the CEO role. It's a big leap from the comfort zone of functional leadership or business unit management, and it opens up a whole new set of stakeholders, pressures, decisions, and responsibilities. I found that there are 3 key things that will make a huge difference in those first quarters. Number 1, balancing the operational and the strategic, what I call CEO focus. Number 2, establishing credibility, what I call CEO presence. And number 3, managing stakeholders, those CEO conversations. I've written a short email series that goes into more detail on the transition to CEO and how you can practically sharpen your CEO focus, solidify your CEO presence, and master your CEO conversations. It's insightful, and it's entirely free of charge, and you can register for it by going to xquadrant.com/go/curve. Now, back to the conversation. Yeah, so to talk about this customer success, you said it a lot. It's definitely something which is core to you. Doesn't everyone say, we want our customers to be successful, and B, what does it mean for you? Like, what are you trying to do when you talk about customer success? Like you said it in the very first sentence, I think, of this discussion. Why is TSG different in this area?
Well, so traditionally, and I'm painting with a very broad brush, but in sort of the tech businesses that sit around us, very much, and as TSG was several years ago, was very much a sales-first organization. So it was very much about engaging with people who knew what they wanted, and then being able to provide exactly what they asked for. But the complexity of what's available to you now, you really need someone to work with you and do some horizon scanning with you, and so that's basically built. Therefore, you have to trust somebody. So on that basis, if the person that's giving you advice on where to go is, highly incentivized for you to buy the most expensive thing, that's quite hard in terms of how do you kind of square that? And I think in most cases you have to rely on the best judgment of salespeople to find that balance. Whereas what we're trying to do is to say, well, actually, let's just not have that balance. Let's have a trusted advisor, somebody who is not financially motivated. They're motivated on the customer and what they're trying to achieve, and they can pull on the right sort of knowledge and experts around them. And in some ways it works, because in a tech business, it's many of the things that you buy are consumable, or it's all about optimization of a platform, or either from a pricing or if you're trying to achieve a goal. And so in some ways I'm very fortunate in the industry that I'm in, because it allows, if you're a trusted advisor and you work with a customer on what's important to them, and you have the scale and the resources you're going to be a bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of, do you have all the expertise that they might need? Well, if you have that, well, then you don't really need to sell. You just need to be a trusted advisor, as I say. But it's a huge leap of faith, because you go from what's a fairly consistent sales performance to saying, well, I can't guarantee what's going to come in. It's going to come in at the right time for the customer rather than the right time for me. So that's an interesting leap where you start to say, well, what does that look like? And that was massive.
How did you sell it to the board?
We did the typical thing. We had an away day. I was so fortunate. My chief exec at the time, now our chairman, it just is really bought in on it. And I think we're both passionate about customer success and doing this differently and changing the industry, not just not just the commercial return, but we, just as you said, that Bezos quote's perfect in that we looked at it. What will this look like in 3 years' time? So, what are the advantages of going down this model, and what are the risks? So, some of the risks are clearly that you're not going to get the big inputs. You're more like big one-off sales. You're more likely to have consistent sort of recurring or smaller bite-sized pieces coming through. But then when you think of, in my industry anyway, some of the big complex projects, these vanity projects from a customer, and when we win it, the issue is high risk for both sides. So by sort of de-risking many of the projects that we're doing, but also from a retention perspective, and I'm happy to say that we're now in the second year. We're now seeing attrition of customers has been halved. So that's having high retention rates is so much that helps on so many different levels in terms of efficiency, your reputation, referrals you get from those same customers, and helps you find other like-minded customers as well. So it was very much a long-term plan. So showing that we don't want to have that leaky bucket syndrome of great sales performance, but then losing 20% of that every year. It's just. And what's interesting, actually, so we're sort of big, not in terms of employee engagement. We use Be Heard survey as a good sort of national indicator around engagement of our staff and so on. And there's been a real halo effect around customer success and pride that people are taking in their roles, and giving that extra discretionary effort, and that helps in lots of other aspects. So, if you just look in brutal sort of sales terms, our conversion rate has gone up by about 20% since following the customer success model. Our sales initially were slower, although we started in the pandemic. So to some degree, if you were going to kitchen sink it, it was the time to do it, right? But year on year, if we look back on the prior year, we've gone up to between 10 to 30% growth in key verticals. So it's we're not there yet. So we've got customer success working in patches, and we've got a great customer success team. The bit when we will have won is when we have a full, everyone in the business is engaged, not just in what we need, but in the customer success approach. Yeah. So, one of the things, sorry, I'm talking for quite a while, but one of the things that I think about is when you think of, there's a book put together by Charles H. Green around being a trusted advisor that I really like. There's a trust equation within that. And that's something that we used to give to consultants in the business to go out when they were talking to customers. And now we're giving it to like our credit control team, or, guys who are in what maybe were more sort of transactional roles, and saying, look, how can you become a trusted advisor with our customers? And what's great is we're really seeing, not everyone, but for the most part, we're seeing real engagement, and those people are getting more from their roles because we're allowing them more empowerment beyond the transactional.
This reminds me of, I think it's The Theory of Preeminence. I think it's by J. Abrahams, I think. And it's basically very similar. I mean, it's the trusted advisor, but the way he describes it, I think there's a great example where it's like the barman who refuses to give you another drink. Because actually, if your highest good, now is the time that you need that glass of water, or whatever. And it's kind of not just saying my job is to sell the person the next drink, but actually to optimize their overall, to have their best interests at heart, even more than their own, which is a really interesting way of looking at it. And it's great that you're scaling it out across the whole team.
Well, that refusing drink is actually, that's a really good proof point. I'll be honest, that was one of the points where it was really, so we had a particular very complex pitch that our team decided to walk away from at the tender point with a potential customer. What was really interesting, that customer then came back and then said, "Oh, we understand you're good at this other bit of technology. Is this something you could do?" And we said, Yeah, no, we feel very comfortable. We could absolutely deliver that for you. And they didn't even tender it. They just went, right, brilliant, it's yours. Can you work on that for us? And there is this trusted advisor piece. It's you need to trust your technology partner ultimately. So when we get it right, it is quite powerful. And we're now in the second year effect. So what's going to be interesting is as I hope it will, there's this sort of virtuous circle that we're following where this impact will then start to flow. But this year alone, we've seen that a quarter of our new customers have come from referral of existing customers, and next year we're expecting that to be about half of our new customers. And bearing in mind we have about 1,000 customers in total. We probably find 50 to 100 new customers, in a year. So if we then find that half of our new business isn't through marketing and other aspects, but actually customers referring you, it's so powerful. Not only because you then find like-minded customers, but it's a great seal of endorsement. If someone recommends you in that way, I think our win rate something like 80-90% of the introductions we get. So it's great. We just need to be careful as not reaching a complacency. So what got us here was a real fear of the risk of moving from a sales to customer success model, and really being focused on those sort of key metrics and engagement. And it's just about making sure that we now move that the next step, which is beyond engagement, to really understanding, well, what is success for that customer, and have we actually attained it for them? Which is the next step really, which is that risk and reward bit, to say, well, look, I'm gonna share that risk and reward with you, which is a very different model.
Yeah, when you need trust on both sides to make that happen. Yeah. Hey, this is a fascinating conversation, but let's move on and move on to our quick fire questions.
Sure.
As we're kind of starting to think about the end in sight. Favorite quote? What's a quote that's kind of shaped your leadership or your approach to your job?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might not sound directly relevant, but I really like the Roosevelt quote about comparison being the thief of joy. There's so many people I meet in terms of their career journeys or pieces outside where they're always comparing themselves to somebody else, and they really, rather than just experiencing their life and enjoying it for what it is, keep comparing themselves.
Fascinating. Yeah, wise words. It can be so easy to look over our shoulder, and I like to say, we're all climbing our own particular mountain in our own way, and we always have to forge that path, right? That's why you can't copy and paste other people's strategies. You always have to work them through for you. What's the favorite app on your phone that makes you more productive or more informed or whatever it is?
You know what it is? That's a really hard question, because you think as a tech person I'd have lots of apps, but I really try and not use apps. I try and really switch off as much as possible. But I've got one of these sort of tablet devices, a Remarkable device, which is a sort of a writing tablet, and using that for journaling and really switching off. It's one of the few devices that doesn't beep at me or send a notification, or it isn't designed specifically for infinite scroll. So it's so really the app that I like is the one that doesn't harass me, but just lets me control the user interaction.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I agree. It's so easy. One of the first thing I almost insist on my clients do is make sure their notifications are switched off, because it's impossible to do any deep work when you have.
But it's true, isn't it? I mean, especially think of it now. You've got presence and instant messaging, email, and multiple ways of phoning you. It's with soft clients as well as mobiles and so on. It's, as I say, that concentration time really important.
Yeah. What's a book? I know you said you're a heavy reader. What's the book that's really influenced you? What's one of your favorites?
Yeah, I know it's a bit old now, and maybe it's not vogue, but I still really like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. That was really formative for me when I was younger, and it's I always say it's like an atheist's business book. It's a really good way of saying there are no shortcuts. There is no hack for life. It's hard work and do the right thing, which is not really what you want to hear, but it's quite nice to sort of have it the way that it sort of puts it at you to say, just do the right thing.
I think it's foundational reading, right, for pretty much anyone. What advice would you give new CEOs, or perhaps what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
probably two different things. I think that the 20-year-old would be, just stay relaxed. I had this view that I didn't have a career plan. I always like to maximize the opportunities that were put in front of me, but just to stay relaxed and just be focused on the role that I'm currently doing, and I would just reinforce that. I think it's sometimes we can get too head up in, well, where's this going to take me? But actually, opportunities present themselves if you just focus on what you're doing, but leave yourself open. I'd say to a 20-year-old, and as a new chief exec, I think just make sure you've got it before you step into that role, if you can, is go find a mentor. Really, I mean, you talked about peer groups. I'm part of a peer group. I just think it's so important. It is and it's often quoted as a lonely role, but it is for good reason. You need to keep counsel with others and have the ability to, be open and be able to get outside thoughts. So a mentor, peer group, massively important, as well as the friendship group outside of that. It's that's making sure you've got the people who keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think assembling a whole, and it's almost a whole team, of different people, mentors, advisors, your peers, because they're all going to stretch you and stretch your thinking, and often that's one thing that you might not get enough of because there's so many operational decisions.
That's absolutely key. That advisor bit, because suddenly, weirdly, when you make that step and then everyone looks at you and says, well, what do you think about my strategy or my approach? And you suddenly now need to be an expert on things that you're not an expert in. And clearly, yes, you can coach and work through, but having an outside advisor on areas where you're not a skilled at, where you can just check things off with is I've only really started to assemble that more recently. And that's really helpful in terms of to give you, you don't double guess decisions, second guess decisions and that sort of thing if you've got the outside advisors.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the best guests on our show come from referrals. So I'm always curious to know, is there an inspiring CEO who's made a difference in your life, who you think would be, who you admire, who would be a good guest? Who comes to mind when you think of people who have inspired you on your journey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've had David, a guy called David Stonehouse, who's my chairman now and mentor. He's got a very broad set of experience. He's been instrumental for me in terms of my sort of growth. There's a guy that I've been working with as part of a peer group of chief execs I'm with, a guy called, haven't spoken to him about this, but called Richard Rankin. I really rate. He's the chief exec of H&H Group over in the northwest of England, and he's got such clarity. Speaks brilliantly. Just a really, just a no BS, but very thoughtful and emotionally intelligent guy. Really, really interested. I always listen when he speaks.
Yeah, I love it. It's always fascinating to find out, what is it about other people that inspire and that resonate with you, right? Because I suspect you've also got that in you. I love asking the question because when people say, "Oh yeah, no bullshit," I put it to you that you're a no bullshit person as well, because it's within you. That's why it resonates.
Yeah, and I just think sometimes you can spend so much time positioning and all. It's just better to yes, there are some things you have to keep in counsel, absolutely, but most things you can just be open and honest, and it tends to work best. Most people want to know what the truth is, even if it's uncomfortable or challenging. It's better to go there early rather than create shocks later. So it's always served me. But maybe I'm a bit of a blunt instrument at times, but I do like to be a spade is a spade. Yeah.
So finally, no matter how much we've achieved, there's always a next level to get to. So where's TSG going as a business? And I guess you've kind of talked about that in the sense of really rolling out this customer experience model across the whole company. But as that happens, what are you going to need to do differently to multiply your own impact as a CEO?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So we've got quite an ambitious plan to, over the next few years, we'll be looking to double the main metrics around turnover, profitability, headcount, and so on. But we're really looking at partnerships as the key. So we're aiming for 500 partnerships, which is sort of an evolution of moving from customer experience to the net promoter piece to now partnership, which is the hardest stat I can find in terms of a bar to hit. Yeah. So as part of that, really for me, it's about assembling the right management team, which I'm most of the way there on. And for me, it's actually about more of my role is going to be about becoming an advocate for customer success, becoming more of an advocate about our capabilities. So, being I'm not a big person into PR and that sort of element. So for me, it's going to be more about showcasing the business and speaking more openly about what it is we're doing and why we're a bit different.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I just love this focus you have of customer success and actually calling them partnerships, right? And actually making sure that you have long-term relationships. I said to you earlier, one of my own metrics I've realized in our conversation actually is that I don't count customers being successful unless I've have repeat business with that customer, because then I know that they're putting their money where their mouth is, that they didn't just get persuaded by me on one conversation or something a year ago and now regret their choice, but they're kind of actually long-term engagement. And for me, that's meant to be the most rewarding part of the business, is when I realize that that's a very, very high percentage of what I do. So I think it's fantastic that you're trying to do that at scale, right, and create that loyalty and intimacy and serving and service.
And that's it. I think you've probably hit on it better there, which is I think our biggest challenge is to do it at scale. So I can see it happening in patches and I can see it, but it's having that, does every existing customer, do they see us in partnership? Do they have trusted advisors? Do they genuinely feel that what I'm talking through, does that bleed through the whole organization? And it's bloody hard, isn't it? I mean, ultimately it's much easier to to give an output to somebody than an outcome, right? I mean, it's much easier. Yeah,
absolutely. Fantastic. So finally, if people are curious, they want to know more, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so more than happy. I'm pretty good at replying on there. Obviously, from a in terms of the TSG business, then tsg.com is our main website. I'm more than happy to speak to anyone around our journey on customer success, particularly, but also just around employee engagement and the bits that have driven that. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Rory. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've loved, thank you for being honest about the imposter syndrome, around the shift and what surprised you as you went in, the expectations on you, and then I think it's whole question about fixing the leaky bucket syndrome and really being in service of your customers. It's really inspiring, and I think it's fantastic that you've been bold, right? And you've said that we're going to put that first rather than build some kind of technical business that works, on the front end, but actually is not giving customers the best experience when you scratch the surface. So thank you for working on the foundations, right, and really focusing on impact. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for having me, Richard.
Many thanks, and stay in touch. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.